They say that music never really dies. It just echoes through the places it was born. In the quiet, sun-soaked streets of Los Angeles, one house carries that echo in a way no one can quite explain. It once belonged to Glenn Frey, the co-founder of the Eagles, a man whose voice shaped the soundtrack of an era. After his passing in 2016, the house sat empty for a while, until a young couple bought it, hoping to build a new chapter of their lives inside those Spanish-style walls. But what they found was not peace. Within weeks of moving in, the wife reported hearing faint guitar strums late at night, though no instruments were in the house. First, she blamed neighbors. But when she went outside, the street was silent. No one awake, the air unnervingly still. The sound always came from the same direction down the hallway that led to Glenn's old study, the room he had once used for songwriting. Her husband dismissed it as stress from the move. But things escalated. A framed Eagles vinyl on the wall, gifted by a friend, would tilt on its own. Doors clicked shut when no one was near. And one night, as the couple argued in the kitchen about whether to sell the house, the radio unplugged and unused crackled to life with a burst of static. From the noise, a single line bled through, "Take it easy." They froze. Neither wanted to admit what they'd just heard, but both of them knew the lyrics were impossible to mistake. From then on, it was no longer just sounds. Neighbors said they often saw a figure pacing the balcony at night, a tall man in a white shirt, pausing as though gazing at the horizon. Yet when the couple rushed upstairs, the balcony was empty. The house itself was beautiful on the surface, the kind of place that real estate agents boast about in glossy magazines, arched doorways, terracotta roof tiles, and tall palms swaying against the pale Los Angeles sky. Yet beneath its warmth, the walls carried a weight, as though the air had been listening for too long. Visitors often remarked on the atmosphere before they even stepped inside. "It feels lived in," one neighbor muttered when he dropped off a welcome gift. Not cozy, not inviting, just lived in, as though someone was still there, waiting. The couple tried to settle into their new life. They decorated the kitchen, filled the living room with new furniture, and repainted the bedroom in lighter tones to brighten the space. But no matter what they changed, the study remained untouched. It was the one room they agreed to leave alone, partly out of respect, partly because something about it didn't feel right. The wooden floors creaked louder there, even though they had been refinished. The windows fogged slightly at night, even in the dry California climate. And most of all, that's where the sounds seemed to begin. At night, the husband often stayed awake in bed, staring at the faint slit of light under the study door. He told himself it was just his imagination, but more than once, he swore he saw shadows pass across that light. The shapes weren't random. They looked like a person walking back and forth, pacing the floor the way an artist might when searching for words, or a melody that refused to come. One evening, the wife decided she couldn't keep avoiding the room. She carried a box of books inside, determined to make it part of the house instead of treating it like a shrine. The moment she stepped in, a strange silence seemed to wrap around her. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library, it was heavy, pressing, as though the room itself were listening. She placed the books on the desk and felt, for just a second, that someone was standing behind her. She turned sharply, but of course no one was there. That night, they both heard it. Faint humming. It wasn't the clear sound of a song, more like someone mouthing a tune under their breath. It drifted through the hallway, filling the bedroom even though the door was closed. The melody was familiar, almost painfully so, peaceful, easy feeling. The wife sat up, wide-eyed, clutching the sheets. Her husband forced a laugh, pretending it was the wind, but his hands trembled as he reached for the lamp. When the light clicked on, the humming stopped. The air was so still afterward that they could hear their own breathing, rapid and shallow. The following days grew worse. Small objects began to shift places. A picture frame of the two of them, set on the mantel, slid an inch to the left when they weren't looking. The wife's coffee mug was found in the study one morning, though she swore she left it in the sink. And late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the floor, the husband found the radio in the study turned on again, though it hadn't been plugged in since the night it first startled them. This time it wasn't static. The radio played a crisp recording of a live performance. Applause filled the room, echoing through the empty house, followed by Glenn's unmistakable voice, clear and strong on a dark desert highway. Cool wind in my hair. The husband lunged for the dial, but before he could touch it, the volume surged as though someone else was holding it, someone unseen. He yanked the cord from the wall, even though he knew there was no power running through it. The sound cut instantly, leaving the house in a silence that was far louder than any music. From that moment, the study was no longer just unsettling, it became unbearable. The wife refused to step inside, and the husband began locking the door at night, though deep down he knew locks meant nothing against whatever had claimed that space. But the strangest part wasn't the sounds or the shadows, it was the smell. Every so often, the couple would catch a faint scent drifting through the house, a blend of cologne and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to musicians in backstage halls. It would appear suddenly, usually late at night, lingering just long enough to raise goosebumps on their skin. The smell was strongest near the balcony, where neighbors swore they had seen the pacing figure. And then, one night, the wife woke to the sound of a guitar string snapping. Not breaking, not falling, silent snapping, sharp and violent, like a wire tearing under pressure. The sound came from the study. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe, because they didn't own a guitar. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The night of the snapping guitar string left the couple rattled in a way they couldn't shake. For the first time, the husband admitted out loud that something was wrong. He tried to hide it beneath his usual rational tone, suggesting that maybe old wiring or vibrations in the house caused noises to echo strangely. But his words betrayed him, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his voice dropped when he spoke about that room. The wife stopped sleeping soundly. She would lie in bed, listening to the house breathe. Every creak of the wood seemed louder now, every distant sound amplified in her mind. Sometimes she thought she heard the faint pluck of strings, single notes hanging in the air like questions left unanswered. Other times, it was just the hush of footsteps, pacing, as though someone was restless in the next room over. The neighbors noticed the change too. One afternoon, a woman from across the street stopped by with a tray of cookies. She lingered on the doorstep longer than necessary, her eyes darting past the couple and into the house. When the husband politely asked if she wanted to come in, she hesitated, then shook her head quickly. "No, thank you," she said, almost too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As she walked away, she muttered something under her breath, something the wife only barely caught. Should have stayed empty. The couple didn't ask what she meant. Instead, they turned their attention inward, trying to live around the disturbances. They kept the study door locked, avoided late nights in the living room, and left music playing quietly in the background to mask the sudden silences that seemed to grip the house. But the house had a way of reminding them that silence wasn't safety, it was a warning. One evening, the husband returned home late from work. The house was dark, except for the faint glow spilling from the upstairs balcony. He frowned because his wife always turned lights off religiously. As he stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke again, sharp and dry, like the lingering presence of someone who had just left the room. He called his wife's name, his voice echoing slightly in the hallway. No answer. The light above flickered once, then went dark. He climbed the stairs cautiously, his heart pounding against his ribs. The floorboards groaned with each step, the sound strangely out of sync with his own movements, as if someone else were climbing beside him. When he reached the landing, he found the balcony doors wide open, curtains drifting in the warm night breeze. He hurried forward, expecting to see his wife standing there. Instead, the balcony was empty. From below, in the quiet street, he heard a faint sound: applause. Soft, scattered clapping, as though from a crowd miles away, yet somehow carried directly to his ears. It faded quickly, leaving him frozen in place, staring at the empty balcony, the curtains still moving as if brushed by invisible hands. When he turned back toward the hall, his wife was standing there, pale and trembling. She had just woken up in their bedroom and didn't know why the balcony doors were open. She swore she hadn't left them that way. The couple stopped trying to deny what was happening. The house no longer felt like theirs, it felt borrowed, as though they were trespassing on someone else's unfinished story. The study remained locked, but they both knew the presence wasn't confined to one room anymore. It followed them through the halls, pressing in during the quietest moments, making them question whether the house wanted them there at all. The wife began hearing whispers when she was alone, hushed voices too low to make out, as though a conversation was happening just out of reach. Sometimes she thought it was a man speaking softly, other times a group, the faint hum of backstage chatter before a show. She would freeze, straining to listen, but the moment she did, the whispers fell silent, replaced by a thick, almost suffocating stillness. And then came the night when the music started again. Not from the radio this time, but from the house itself. It was around midnight when the husband woke to the sound of strumming, clear and deliberate, coming from the living room. He slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake his wife, and crept downstairs. The air grew colder with each step, sharp enough that he could see his breath when he exhaled. There, in the corner of the living room, was the shadow of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, a guitar slung across his chest. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there, strumming chords that echoed through the house like memories brought back to life. The husband blinked, and the figure was gone. But the music kept playing. The music lingered long after the shadow was gone. It wasn't loud, not the kind of sound that rattled windows or echoed through walls. It was subtle, intimate, the way a guitarist strums when he's lost in thought, unaware of anyone listening. Each chord was drawn out, resonant, with a clarity that made the husband's skin crawl. He stood frozen on the staircase, one hand gripping the banister, unable to convince himself to go down the last few steps. He listened, breath caught in his throat. The sound was coming from the exact corner of the room where the figure had stood. Yet there was nothing there now, no guitar, no musician, no trace of life at all. Just a couch, a lamp, and a silence so sharp it hummed in his ears. When he finally forced himself to step down, the music stopped mid-chord, abruptly, like someone lifting their hands from the strings. The silence afterward was unbearable. He moved cautiously through the room, touching the lamp, the couch, the walls, as though he might find a hidden speaker or some logical source. There was nothing. By the time he returned upstairs, the wife was awake, sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide and glassy. "You heard it too," she whispered before he could say anything. Her voice wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. She had heard every note, even through the closed door. The days after that night grew heavier, as though the house itself was shifting around them. Light bulbs began burning out at an unusual rate, leaving entire rooms in shadow. The air conditioning faltered, creating patches of unnatural cold that drifted from room to room. And always, the faint smell of smoked cigarettes, sometimes mixed with cologne, seemed to appear just as the atmosphere thickened. They tried inviting friends over, hoping company might change the mood. But the house didn't allow that kind of ease. One couple left early after claiming they heard someone moving upstairs while everyone was in the living room. Another guest joked about the place feeling like an old recording studio after hours, though he laughed less and less as the evening went on. The wife noticed the whispers growing stronger. They weren't random anymore. Sometimes, in the late hours when the house was still, she could almost make out words. A phrase here, a sentence there. "Run it again. From the top." "Not yet." It sounded like fragments of rehearsal, voices caught in an endless loop of creation. But hearing them, disembodied and hovering in the air of her home, filled her with dread. One night she braved the study again, against her better judgment. The desk was as it had always been, bare except for the few books she had left there weeks ago. But the room carried a weight she couldn't describe, as though the air were thicker, harder to move through. She noticed something new on the window pane, faint marks, almost like smudges, in the shape of fingers pressing against the glass from the inside. She touched them and felt a faint warmth, as though someone had only just been there. The husband, meanwhile, began keeping a notebook of the strange events. He tried to document them like a scientist, recording the dates, times, and what was heard or seen. But his notes grew less clinical over time. His handwriting grew slanted, rushed, as if fear had seeped into the ink itself. On one page he had written only 3 words, underlined twice. "He won't leave." The wife found it one morning and confronted him. He didn't deny writing it. He only said that the house felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't ready to let go. The tension between them deepened. They argued more, each blaming the other for feeding the atmosphere with fear. Yet both knew, in their quiet moments, that neither of them could ignore it anymore. They were living inside something that wasn't entirely theirs. The turning point came one evening just before dusk. The wife was folding laundry in the bedroom when she heard it. The distinct sound of a crowd cheering, muffled at first, like the roar of an audience behind closed doors. It grew louder, swelling until it filled the room, until she could almost feel the vibration of thousands of voices. She stumbled back, clutching a shirt in her hands, certain she was losing her mind. But then her husband came running in from the hallway, pale and wide-eyed. "You hear it too?" he gasped. The sound grew so strong it seemed to seep into the walls, into the floor, into their very bones. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence crashed down again, and the couple stood frozen, staring at one another, neither daring to speak. The applause hadn't come from any speaker or hidden source. It had come from the house itself. The night after the phantom applause, the couple barely spoke. The house seemed to wait with them, like a living thing holding its breath. Every room felt charged, as though invisible eyes followed their movements. Even simple routines, brushing teeth, making tea, folding clothes, became acts performed under unseen observation. The wife started avoiding mirrors. One evening, while washing her face in the upstairs bathroom, she glanced up and froze. Behind her, in the reflection, was the unmistakable outline of a man standing in the hallway. His face wasn't clear, more like a shadow cut against dim light, but his posture was casual, relaxed shoulders, arms at his sides, as if he belonged there. She spun around instantly. The hallway was empty. She didn't finish washing her face. She went straight to bed and told her husband they needed to leave. But the husband, though terrified, felt a strange pull. He confessed something that made her blood run cold. He had started dreaming in music. Every night, when he closed his eyes, he would hear melodies. Sometimes lyrics he didn't recognize, other times riffs that felt half-finished, like songs still in the making. When he woke, the music lingered, as if it had been played right there in the room. "It's like he's still writing," the husband whispered one night. "Like he's using me." The wife wanted to leave immediately, but houses aren't always easy to walk away from, especially ones tied up in contracts, finances, and pride. They stayed, though each night felt heavier than the last. Then came the night that changed everything. A storm rolled in from the west, rare for Los Angeles. The sky split with lightning, rain hammered the roof, and the house seemed to groan beneath the weather. The couple huddled in the bedroom, listening to the downpour. Around midnight, the electricity cut out. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from occasional flashes outside. That was when the guitar started again. Not faint this time, not gentle strumming. Not background noise, but loud, urgent, powerful. The notes reverberated through the walls, filling every corner of the house, as if an amplifier had been plugged into its very foundation. The chords were sharp, commanding, demanding to be heard. The husband jumped up, convinced that if they didn't face it now, they never would. He grabbed a flashlight and stormed toward the study. His wife screamed for him not to go, but he didn't listen. He flung open the locked door, the lock giving way far too easily, and shone the beam inside. What he saw made his knees buckle. The room was filled with light. Not electric light, but a dim golden glow, like stage lights bleeding through smoke. The air shimmered faintly, and in the middle of the room stood the figure again, tall, broad-shouldered, guitar in hand. This time it wasn't just shadow. His features were clearer, illuminated by that strange glow. It was Glenn Frey, The husband's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't look at him directly, didn't acknowledge him at all. He just kept strumming, eyes fixed somewhere beyond, as if playing for an audience that wasn't there. Each note seemed to rattle the house, vibrating through the floorboards, making the husband's chest ache with the sound. The wife appeared in the doorway behind him, sobbing, begging him to leave. The figure finally turned his head slightly, just enough for them to see the expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't peace. It was something in between, a restless determination, the look of a man not finished with what he started. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the glow collapsed into darkness. The guitar went silent. The figure was gone. But the smell of smoke and cologne lingered, heavy and undeniable. They left the house the next morning, packed whatever they could into the car, and drove until Los Angeles was behind them. They told friends the house had bad energy, though neither dared to speak openly about what they had seen. Months later, when the property was listed again, the real estate description emphasized the charm. A Spanish-style home with history, character, and timeless energy. Neighbors shook their heads, muttering that it would only happen again, that no one ever really stayed. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind carried just right, people swore they could hear it. The faint strum of a guitar drifting from the balcony, notes carried into the night air, the music of a man who had left the world, but not his house. Glenn Frey's house never truly emptied. It simply kept playing. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.